recently got diagnosed with ASD, which is Autism Spectrum Disorder, or just autism. A lot of people know that they're autistic before they turn the age of 22. However, I was not so lucky, or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. It's still a lot to process, as this isn't a disorder that you just develop one day. This is something that you deal with from day one, and yet I've only had confirmation recently, a few months shy of turning 23. The past year or so, I had an idea that I was likely autistic, but also thought that maybe I was just looking too deep into things and that I was just making excuses for the way I saw the world. I was always seen as different, or at least I felt as though I was seen differently. I struggled socializing and never really managed to hold friendships or relationships, and the friendships and relationships I did manage to keep were often turbulent. School was hard since I always felt as though I wasn't on the same intellectual or academic level as my peers, and while I did end up succeeding academically, I still always felt as though I was behind. Work has been especially difficult for me due to anxiety, social interactions, and the overall environment being overwhelming. Every job I've had, I started out enjoying, but as time has gone on, I've ended up becoming so unwell mentally that I've either been sacked or I've had to quit. Suicidal ideation, self harm, and disordered eating have been a part of my life for the longest, and part of me feels like they seemingly came out of nowhere. But I also know that the struggles I had daily at the time, like bullying, played a role, though I don't know how significant that role was. I first decided to get an autism assessment when I was around 18 because I had not long been diagnosed with depression and anxiety, but I felt as though the diagnosis didn't really have much basis to it. Like, yeah, I was aware that I struggled, but I didn't feel as though the doctor really had much to go off when giving me the diagnosis. I felt that I couldn't quite relate to others who had depression and anxiety, and while I know it is different for everybody, something just seemed off to me. I knew I got along with other autistic people and related to them more than anyone else, so I figured I'd just get it out of the way. To be clear though, I didn't actually think that I was autistic. I thought that I could rule out the possibility and maybe my actual problems would be picked up on from there. I phoned my GP and told them I want an assessment. The GP said to me, "Do you have any OCD tendencies?" At the time, I said no because I didn't realize that the things I did were considered abnormal or OCD like. So, upon me telling him that I didn't have any tendencies, he just said, "Well, then you're not autistic." And it was left at that. At 20, I went to a mental health practitioner for an appointment. I think this appointment was for them to decide whether or not to refer me to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. One of the women was in the psychology field, and the other was a child support worker, which was strange to me since I was 20, but I just ignored it. They asked me questions, and I responded accordingly, telling them all about my childhood and the struggles I've had from as far back as I can remember to the current day. I told them I had been self harming since 15 years old, was bullied, had dealt with my family splitting, amongst many other things. He even opened up about instances I've had with aggression and disassociation. They both left the room to discuss what the next steps were, and after 5 minutes, they came back and told me they made the decision not to refer me further because, and I quote, "It seems you just had a bit of a shit year last year." I wish that my retelling of the responses I got not only from the GP, but also from these two clinicians was just me hyperbolizing the actual conversation, or that I was just playing it up to make it sound worse, but it's not, unfortunately. These were the genuine responses I was given, which, given how awful they were, it's no surprise that I remember it so vividly. From there, I just kind of gave up. I figured that I was fine and that I just needed to get over it. I've spent 4 years switching medications, being given the same advice over and over like go outside, sleep better, eat better, smile more. Eventually, I just managed to convince myself that I really was healthy and that I just needed to stop making excuses for my failures. Fast forward to last year, and all of a sudden, I'm being asked non-stop if I'm autistic. I'd meet someone new and they'd say, "No offense, but are you autistic?" I'd talk about my habits and the way I think, and I'd be told it's common with autism. Or, "I only know one other person who does that and they're autistic." Or, "I do that too, but that's because of my autism." I started working and going to university and found myself becoming increasingly more overwhelmed even though I genuinely enjoyed my job and my course. I found the sounds and the tasks debilitating in work, and then in uni, I found socializing and understanding the work incredibly difficult. Eventually, one of the guys on my course told me about an online test that was developed by autistic people and told me that everyone he's recommended it to who had high results ended up being diagnosed with autism. So I decided to take the test, thinking nothing of it. It showed that I had a high probability of being autistic, and while I shrugged it off, it stayed in the back of my mind for quite a while. Online, I'd end up getting recommended TikToks and Reels by autistic women, talking about lesser known characteristics that are common mainly amongst autistic women. I found that I related in a way that I never had before. These women were putting my feelings into words which I had never heard before. I thought I was the only one who felt this way, but now I know that there are others just like me. From here, I decided I'd try to get an assessment, and this time I was able to self refer, so I didn't have to deal with a GP deciding for me. I did my first 2 written assessments and sent them off, and in January of this year, I was officially referred for an autism assessment. I live in Wales, so I have access to the NHS. The problem is, though, NHS waiting lists are excruciatingly long, but I thought I'd have to wait a year tops, which I felt I could deal with. Cut to August, I had a bit of a turning point. In one of my recent videos, I mentioned an incident that landed me in hospital. What happened was, I found myself becoming more and more anxious and overwhelmed, what with being in the summer holidays and not having much of a routine, and also worrying about my future. As I said, working has always been hard for me, and I was worried that I might never be able to sustain myself. It all got too much, and I had a meltdown, reaching for the closest sharp I could find. The next morning, my mother took me to the hospital for stitches and bandaging, as I had gone too deep and could have caused a lot of harm to myself, such as higher risk of infection. I was advised to contact 111, which is the mental health emergency hotline where I live. I explained to the nice man on the other side of the phone what I had done and why I had done it, and he told me that it's understandable. I didn't know what was wrong with me and I was losing control. He suggested that I find out when my assessment would be because surely it wouldn't take too long. So, next thing I did was call the Autism Assessment Centre I was referred to, and quickly my hopes just disappeared. I was told I'd have to wait another 3 to 4 years. This was an issue for me because by that point I'll be 25, 26, and would want to have settled a little bit, be more independent, be able to start a family. I then made the decision to go private, which, while it was expensive, it was worth it. I ended up referred and diagnosed within the span of a month. Since my assessments and reports, I've learned a lot about myself and have more access to help that will actually be beneficial to me, which I'm really thankful for. The reason I wanted to talk about this is because until recently, I didn't realize how much I have been affected by autism. I've spent almost 23 years being autistic without knowing, and it really has had a severe impact on me. Usually, when I talk about this type of stuff, I assume that others might be able to relate. But this time, I know for a fact that others can. I know because I've met them. Either they're going through it now or they have been through it. I felt so stuck, feeling as though I have no prospect in life, as though I will never be happy or healthy, but now I know why. I've spoken to others who suspected they were autistic or had ADHD, and when I asked them if they were going to get an assessment, they've said, no, I don't see the point. I've lived this long with it, so it wouldn't make a difference. Which I see, and all power to them. For me, though, it wasn't the case. This diagnosis has given me a bit of hope that I can get help and live a real life. Now I know what my disadvantages are and why I have them, and I can get help for them. I know it sounds silly, but being diagnosed with autism has been a massive deal for me. I still have a long way to go, plenty of recommendations from my clinicians for me to go through, such as taking my diagnosis to the doctors, getting assessed for an eating disorder, join some support groups, so on and so forth. Clinicians were actually disgusted that I've been given no help over the years, so they put a significant amount of emphasis on the need for the doctors to take me seriously, which I'm so happy about. I know this video was probably rambly or seemed maybe insignificant. I just wanted to share my experiences in hopes that it might bring someone else comfort, whether they're going through the same thing or something similar. Or maybe it'll encourage people to continue fighting for their health to be taken seriously. It's taken me a while, but I think I've finally got there, and I'm glad that I kept trying. If you did watch this entire thing, thank you. I know that it's not the funniest video. I know that it's quite mellow and maybe a little bit depressing. I appreciate you if you did watch the full thing. And I hope that whatever you're going through, you continue fighting to get better.